Welcome to the Ranking Revolution podcast, your go-to source for strategies and ideas for SEO, organic growth, content creation, and online business. I'm your host, Doug Cunnington. Scaling a business is the dream, right? More clients, more revenue, more impact. But like most worthwhile endeavors, it's not without its challenges. As someone who has both navigated the thrilling successes and frustrating pitfalls of scaling, I'm here to share some hard-won lessons. First, let me share a bit about my background to give you context. I'm a PMP. I'm a certified project management professional since 2008, which makes me feel a little bit old, but I've had this certification for a few years. And getting the certification requires extensive work experience, a rigorous application process, and passing a challenging exam. It is multiple choice, but it's one of those tricky multiple choice where there's answers A, B, and C, and then there's D and E where it's like both A and B or neither A and C. It's a tough test. A lot of material in there. I also have consulting experience. I've worked with top-tier consulting firms and clients. These are household names. These are huge companies that probably a lot of us work with or have an ongoing contract with such companies, but I won't mention them here. But basically, I've learned industry-leading methodologies. However, I've also seen firsthand the inefficiencies that do exist in large organizations, and I sort of fit in the middle management area where I took advantage of those inefficiencies so I could work on my side hustles and side projects. I also have success as a solo entrepreneur. I scaled my side hustle into a full-time business. I managed a flexible team where I sort of spawned it up. I didn't have any full-time hires, and I adapted quickly to changing needs so I could grow quickly and then, if I decided to, scale down in an easy way. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, in the corporate gig, I played a key role in growing a team from about 15 to around 100 full-time employees. I handled screening, I handled interviewing, training, and onboarding. There were a team of us doing this stuff, but I definitely spearheaded the onboarding and training portion where I iterated and it actually informed how we could do this on a smaller level, and it worked great. So let's talk about the pros and cons, and I'll also tell you about common mistakes when scaling and maybe some criteria to help you understand if you're ready to scale or not. It's actually more material than I'm going to be able to cover today, so I'm probably going to cover in a couple episodes. So for pros, some of these are pretty straightforward, very easy to understand. So revenue growth, right? If you scale, you're probably going to earn more money, top line revenue. You will probably have a higher production capacity. That's kind of the goal when you're scaling. So you can produce more of the widgets that you're producing, provide more services, essentially bring in more money. There's a good chance you're going to have greater efficiency at scale. And we'll talk about this as a double-edged sword. Additionally, and I wrote this separately, you're probably going to have a higher profit. So we talked about the revenue, but we are probably most concerned about the profit for most of us. Certainly there are business models like a SaaS or maybe a services business where you're interested in purely the top line revenue. And even if the profits stay around the same, if you're bringing in more money and you have more clout in the industry, that could be valuable. The others, maybe a softer one, but very important nonetheless, a feeling of badassity and accomplishment. So if you scale and you face challenges, you work your way through them, and you get it done, feels really good at the end of the day. It will be challenging, and there are some mistakes that you're probably going to make. Even if you know this going in, mistakes will be made. Last pro that I listed here, there's a bunch, but basically you could be one of the leaders in your space or your niche. The higher production can mean that you are meeting customer demand more effectively and potentially taking over market share. So you are the person that does X in a specific industry. And again, that could lead to a lot of revenue growth, not necessarily more profits, but depending on your timeline and your ultimate goal, like maybe you want to be acquired or sell the business, then just having higher revenue and being the person, the business that does the thing in your industry can be super valuable. Everything is not rosy though. So when you scale, here are some of the cons that you're going to run into. It's not all rosy. So here are some of the cons that you'll run into when you're scaling. It is going to be more complex. Pretty obvious, but a lot of people just think, hey, I'm going to grow. I have an influx of money and I'm going to do this. But it's going to be more complicated and it's going to be more stressful. There's pretty much no way around it. And if you expect it to happen, it will be a little bit easier to deal with. Similar, and again, maybe some of these are obvious, so I'll just stop saying that. You're going to have more team members. The team is going to grow. That means you're going to run into all the things that I talked about before when I scaled the team from 15 to 100 in my old corporate job. Basically, you're going to have to screen people. You're going to have to find candidates. You'll have to interview them. You're going to have to train them. And then you're going to have to deal with the communication challenges that you're going to run into with more team members. There's no way around it. When you scale, you might amplify your inefficiencies or your unoptimized processes. And it will be painful because you might not know that you have these inefficiencies until you scale it, and then it becomes apparent. You can see the issues that you have. And if you don't have optimized systems, when you try to scale, you're just going to make things worse. There's probably going to be more waste or mistakes or both in your overall organization. And the thing that's kind of weird is you're probably going to gain some efficiency of scale, whether it's physical production or maybe you're a service-based business or agency, and you will gain some efficiency of scale, even if it's just pure repetition and iteration and people get better at their job or a team gets better at their job. There still will be waste. The larger a system gets, the more complex a system is, the more waste there's going to be. And we could point to the efficiencies and hope that it's going to be a higher trade-off, but you just have to be okay with the fact that maybe a project runs and there was a huge mistake and you kind of have to toss it out and there's just more waste in it. Last con that I listed here was amplifying those inefficiencies might look like an kind of a faulty order fulfillment process or maybe a mistake in the manufacturing process if it is a physical product, but essentially you'll end up with delays as you handle more throughput, whatever your business is. So this is one of the pitfalls. This is one of the areas which we'll talk about these common mistakes as we transition. But basically, things are going to go slower as you're scaling, even though you want them to go faster. You're adding team members. You're doing things so that you can improve your overall output. But as you're training, as you're growing the team, you're going to hit some points where things are going to go slower. So let's get into these common mistakes. So if you scale too soon, you're going to potentially have an issue. So there's a couple of pieces that you should consider. So one, maybe you don't have the skills to actually start scaling yet. So maybe you're early in your business and you hear people talking about scaling and you're like, I want to scale to 7 figures or whatever. And you just don't have the chops yet. And you may need to spend more time developing your skills in the area. Maybe your systems and your processes are not in a good place yet to scale. So again, you have these inefficiencies. And if you try to scale, you're going to kind of do a bad job. Like it's just going to work even worse than it was before. And if you're having any issues with order fulfillment or working with clients or whatever your business is, it's going to get worse. All right. It's going to get worse if you don't have things optimized. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be in a good spot. Last one, in scaling too soon. Basically, if you don't have the revenue to cover the expenses because it's going to cost money to scale and there's going to be waste in the system. If you don't have enough money and your cash flow doesn't support it, then you shouldn't do it. Again, one of these obvious ones, but there's a bit of a balancing act of having enough, financial support, whether it's internal, external, maybe you're going into debt and borrowing money to do this. So you have to really have a strong handle and understand the cash flow situation. This one is perfect to follow scaling too soon. If you scale too late, that is also a mistake. So there's kind of a Goldilocks situation where it's just right when it's not too soon, but it's not too late. A couple signs if it's too late. So maybe you've been struggling keeping up and you're working, I'm just going to make up an example. You're working 14 hours a day, 6-7 days a week. You could barely keep up. And remember, when you start scaling, you're going to have to hire people, you're going to have to train them, and there's going to be more complexity, which means you can't spend all your time on delivery. Or if it's a smaller team and maybe you have 3 or 4 people working with you, then they won't be able to spend all their time doing delivery. You're going to have to spend a solid chunk of your time, maybe the majority of your time, maybe, 40 to 60% of your effort is onboarding, training, and getting things running, because you need to make sure as you're scaling, people know what they're doing. So if you're struggling to keep up and you don't have time to train new people, you've waited too long. The other part is there's going to be more work and more clients coming in because you're hiring people and you need more revenue coming in to be able to pay for that. And the thing is, if you are too busy, you're too tired, you're making mistakes because you're too tired and you're working too hard, then you're going to have an issue bringing on the new team members and delivering with the same quality that you or your smaller team were able to deliver before you scaled. Again, it's a bit of a balancing act because you don't want to scale too soon, but you don't want to scale too late. Now, I'll give you a tip, right? So there's a way that you can do this in a gradual way. And that's what I did. That's what we ended up doing with the corporate team that I helped grow. By the way, if you have a chance to do this when you're working for someone else, it's fantastic because you're doing the work and you're learning on someone else's dime. So I was able to do that. I was paid well. I had a strong team around me and I had a lot of mentors that I could turn to ask them about what to do and learn from their mistakes that they made in the past. They were a few years ahead of me, so it was a perfect way to learn. So if you have an opportunity, do that. So another mistake that people make, and it ties into this gradual, is basically if you try to scale everything all at once is very quickly. It's best to take this in stages. So I'll give you a specific example when I scaled up a content team, but it could be any kind of team. Took it slow, and going slow in the beginning helped me grow faster later. And the main thing is I took an iterative approach. So I was able to bring on a few people, test, bring on a few more people, test, improving all along the way. So the main part was improving the onboarding and training. That was the most time-consuming portion. I actually hired fairly quickly and just got people to do project jobs on a small scale, and I paid them. So everybody won. And then if I enjoyed working with a person, I would test them again. So iterative process. Here's exactly what I did. I hired 1 or 2 writers at a time and asked them for feedback on the job aids that I created and other training materials. And I would make the changes to make sure it was clear, any questions that they had. Next, I would hire 1 or 2 more writers, maybe a week or 2 later, pretty quick to get this feedback. And I use the same process. So they do a paid project job. I would ask for feedback and I would get more tips on how to improve the training overall. So when I had about 5 or 6 writers, I asked the best 2 if they wanted to be content managers / editors. Usually only one wanted to do it. And if they both wanted to do it, then great. I could go from there. Sometimes there would be a delay on the schedule, but basically, if they had an interest in doing that role, I would promote them. So the content manager would lead a team of 4 or 5 people. I made sure that the output of the writers of 4 or 5 on that team matched up with the amount of work that the content manager and editor wanted to do. So there was sort of a perfect throughput for a specific team. I was able to create about 4 of those teams of writers with a content manager leading them. After the first team, it went much faster because I hired fast. I did these projects where they were paid, so they would work quickly. I could test them very fast in just 2-3 days or so. And then once they were on board and they were good to go, then I could add them to a team. I had a content manager who was already experienced with a few weeks of writing. Typically, those folks wanted a little bit of a break, some variety versus, writing full time. So perfect way to spawn up a freelance team. Of course, you could do this if you were hiring them for full time. It was a perfect way to hire a freelance team. You could do this on a full-time basis as well, using the same ideas. Overall, I was hiring on a small scale, was ensuring the training was improved along the way. I ensured that it was correct. And then I promoted the stars of the team so that they would be managers. And then I wouldn't have a bunch of people that I had to communicate with directly the whole time. The next mistake that a lot of people make is scaling too fast. So when you have a big team, it gets complicated with all the communication channels. So if you have 20 people working for you in a fairly flat org chart where everybody communicates directly with you, then you're going to go crazy. There's a lot of messages bouncing back and forth. And just imagine if each person has 1 question per day and each question requires maybe 2 messages from you and 2 messages from them, whether it's in Slack or WhatsApp or some other mechanism or email, you're going to have some issues with that. And you might be thinking, scaling too fast, it doesn't seem like it's going to be an issue, but sometimes if there's an influx of money somehow, so imagine, and a lot of you are probably thinking, scaling too fast, it doesn't seem like a common mistake, but a scenario that might happen is something good happens, right? You have a lot of clients come in. So there's a huge influx of revenue. And then you have to deliver on whatever it is you're selling. So then you're like, I have all this money. I actually can hire a lot of people. Or you have maybe an external investment and you're like, I just got $40,000 and now I can hire a bunch of people. And you actually have the revenue and you actually have the capital to spend the money. And you end up in a situation where you create a super complex situation with all the communication channels and training and all that stuff. And I've seen it happen. I've talked to actually a lot of folks after podcast interviews and I ask, hey, how's it going? They're like, oh my God, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And they have a big team of people. Maybe they did a good job in their first couple clients, their first 6 months or whatever. And then they started advertising and the word of mouth started spreading. All of a sudden, these folks are completely overwhelmed. They have a huge amount of revenue coming in, but they're struggling with actually delivering it and the quality goes down. Speaking of money, overspending can be a fairly major issue here. I referred to understanding your cash flow and finances earlier, and it can be one of those situations where you need to scale and you're preparing, and maybe you don't have enough clients coming in yet. So your cash flow and growth should catch up. So you can benefit by the sort of piecemeal, step-by-step approach that I mentioned before, where you grow very slowly. Don't hire like a team of 15 or something like that, or set up a contract to outsource with a company and you're like, I'm going to need like 20 people. Don't do that. go very slow, and that will help you grow into this scaling process in a slower way if you're doing it before basically your revenue justifies it. And that's basically what I did. So I wasn't pulling in enough money yet, but I was reinvesting enough so that I was able to grow without overspending. The next portion, especially if you're scaling fast, is neglecting the culture. So this goes for really more full-time hiring situations. But basically, if you're hiring a lot of people, you kind of lose the unique aspects that made your business successful as you grow it. And I mentioned before, I didn't want to have all these communication channels with 20 people. I knew that I would not enjoy that personally. So basically, it's tough to make sure the culture is strong and represent your business without those direct touch points. So there's a balancing act, and you can maybe foster this through some like weekly all hands meetings, although I hate that term, but basically you just have like weekly meetings and make sure the culture is strong and however you want it to be. The thing with my team is I was intentionally growing it with freelancers so that I could descale the team and basically evaporate the team whenever I wanted. So if you are growing a full-time situation, then you should keep culture in mind. And the last one here is micromanagement. So when you hire the team and you're training them, you want them to take work off your plate. And you don't want to micromanage them because it takes up your time. And basically, no one wants to be micromanaged. If they want to be micromanaged, then you don't want them on your team, most likely. So when you delegate it and get out of the way. So maybe the most important part is understanding who is ready to scale. So think about some of your business indicators out there, but essentially scaling isn't for everyone, and timing is very important. So we'll go over a few things. We'll talk about business indicators, financial indicators, systems and skills you have, plus a couple red flags. So I'm going to run through these pretty quickly to keep this episode tight. But if you do have questions, sign up for the email list. There's a link in the show notes, and I don't send out many emails. I keep you informed about episodes that are coming out. I'll probably let you know about other stuff if something interesting is happening. But sign up for the email list, and then you can hit reply and let me know what you think, if there's areas you want to explore further. So, business indicators. It's great to see consistent revenue growth. You clearly understand the upward trend in revenue over multiple months or quarters, not just like a one-time spike. So it might be tempting to think that one spike is going to continue forever, but from a risk standpoint, you definitely want to see a trend, not a flash in the pan. Next is profitability. So it's great to have a high, revenue point, but it's so important to have a healthy profit margin. And as I mentioned before, even though you might gain some efficiencies in the scale, there's also going to be waste. And some of the profitability sort of killers might pop up unexpectedly. So if you have a very healthy profit margin, then it indicates that your core operations are financially sound and things are going well. Next is market demand. If there's clear evidence of unmet demand for your product or service, then you could feel a little less risk on your shoulders. So if you're in the AI market, there's a lot of growth there. But if you're in, some other business that is not as popular, then maybe you shouldn't be scaling because there's not as much interest. But AI is a perfect example. Another business indicator is strong customer retention. If you have great retention with your existing clients and customers and they keep buying stuff, as you bring on more new customers, you can rest a little bit easier knowing that you have a strong customer retention. overall, and you've seen the evidence over the quarters. Financial indicators, these are fairly straightforward, but we could definitely go deeper if you want to hear more about it in a future episode. So obviously, positive cash flow. So you have consistent and positive cash flow. Then you'll be able to, hire more people, continue marketing or improve your marketing, get infrastructure if you need it. There's usually software costs, sometimes some hardware costs, depending on what you're doing. Next is about customer acquisition cost and being able to acquire new customers cheaply. It's becoming potentially more difficult depending on your industry or easier depending on your industry. But having those low acquisition costs is super important. I think most of the time, if you assume that your acquisition costs are going to grow, that's probably accurate when you think about, customers from different social media platforms or anything driven by an algorithm. It typically gets more difficult to acquire customers. No matter the industry, ads get more expensive, algorithms change, things are costing more money just in general, and that includes customer acquisition. The last key one to note in finances is around your debt to equity ratio and just debt overall. But essentially, I like to not go into debt and borrow money to grow the business. I don't want to do that. It depends on your risk level, the cost that it costs you to borrow the money. Definitely don't do this shit on credit cards. That would be a super expensive way. So if you could borrow money in a financially sound way, that might be okay. Investors, hard money loans, whatever works for you, but credit cards are a terrible way to do it. Anyway, if you don't have much debt, that is a good sign. As we're moving on to skills and systems, this is an area where I had a ton of experience. It's where I really excel. So you want to have documented processes, SOPs, standard operating procedures, make it very easy for new team members to get trained, have consistent results, and each new team member have consistent results. Very, very important. You want to make sure your technology is scalable, maybe taking orders, maybe going through a order process from a service-based business. Like if you're an agency, you want to make sure when someone orders, that process going through your website and the software and other maybe like ticket tracking or whatever it is, you need to make sure that scales well and doesn't crash or slow down or introduce some major issue. The good part most of the time with a technological problem is it is a problem to solve, and someone has probably faced that problem before, and there is a solution out there. You just have to find it. Big skill is leadership and delegation. So you need to be able to delegate effectively and then trust your team to execute and get out of the way. A lot of times you hear folks really improving their overall output for their company once they let the team do it, assuming that they have hired the right team and they've trained properly. Finally, adaptability and flexibility. Basically, whatever your plan is, no matter how much time you put into it, it is wrong. All right, it's going to be different. You're going to try something and it's going to have different results than you expected. There's going to be some external factor that you didn't consider. There's going to be an external factor you did consider, and then you're going to get a different result than whatever you expected. So you have to adapt and make decisions, be a leader, and essentially take a risk in those decisions, understanding that the main thing you don't want to do, maybe this is the whole point of this, the main thing you don't want to do is lose so bad that you have to quit playing the game. With a game analogy, of course. So you don't want to go out of business. You don't want to lose so much. You don't want to go into debt. You don't want to fuck up your cash flow so much that you have to stop doing your project and get a job. That is, I'm getting like bad chills just thinking about that. For me, getting a full-time job would be, it hurts to think about. I don't want to think about it anymore. Okay. So skills and systems, Let's talk about a couple red flags here. So I alluded to it earlier, but just straight up, if you have overwhelming demand, if you're too busy, if you are stressed out, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not getting enough rest, you don't see your family, you don't see your friends, you're just working too much, you're going to fuck it up. You're going to mess it up. So if you have overwhelming demand, you need to figure out how to take a breath and scale the team, or scale the business, however you need to do it, understanding that your actual output is probably going to get lower for a little while before it gets better. That is just the way it goes. Another red flag, to bang on this drum again, is cash flow problems. If you're struggling to pay your bills or make payroll, or you have to shuffle money around to be able to pay things and then borrow, and you're just kind of on the edge of debt, that is not good. That is not good. You need to stabilize your finances first. Finally, a lack of direction. So if you don't have a clear vision on where you want the business to go, the scaling can lead to chaos and wasted resources. And sometimes people scale in a sort of a very wide way. So instead of optimizing their core product, they start selling a bunch of other related products, and it kind of dilutes their whole message, the whole thing they're working on. So you should have a clear vision, and I will let you know, like I mentioned before, whatever plan you think, whatever vision you think, the direction, it's going to be different than what you expect. So you will have to be flexible, but I'm going to mess up the quote, but basically like the plan, the point of the plan is to create the plan, knowing that it's going to change. Like it's just to go through the process, to think about as much as you can, as much as a process as you possibly can, knowing that you're wrong because you can't predict the future. You're just giving your best guess. So basically, you should have a clear vision for where you want your business to go while being flexible, and it should be okay. But you just don't want to be without direction and just in a chaos situation. So I actually have more notes on the financial considerations, on the team building, and a couple other pieces, but that's enough for now. So don't forget, sign up for the email list if you have any thoughts, and you can just hit reply and then I get those emails. And finally, if you like the show, please share it with a friend. Find an episode that you think they would connect to, and it helps spread the word. Really, word of mouth is the best way to grow a podcast. And it's really hard to do because we forget about it. As soon as you hit stop or you go on, listen to another episode, because you're probably driving, you're probably working around the house, maybe working out or something like that, or on a walk with a dog, you're going to forget about it. So just remember, if you bump into someone at a conference, let them know, like, hey, check out Ranking Revolution, or maybe you see someone ask a question in a Facebook group, just remember these shows. And if you think a specific episode could help, let the person know. That way they have a very easy way to find the episode that they want. You can just tell them the number, right? And number the episode. So it's super easy. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you on the next episode.